But does anyone, maybe before we get to that, does anyone have any burning question, any particular request for today? No.
I actually have a pretty interesting topic. I think that might be nice to discuss.
Please, please.
What would please Mahaprabhu more, preaching or bhajan?
Well, I have a question to that question. How are you defining bhajan?
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, this idea of bhajan is being this like quiet internal thing that you do in a cave or you do in your room. I don't know exactly where that came from. I mean, it is an idea that has been used in Gaudiya Vaishnava circles and Gaudiya Vaishnava discourse, but like in Gurudev's dictionary, I don't think it works like that. No.
Well, I think somewhat might come from the idea of this Bhajananandi and Goshananandi.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the word does have some broadness of meaning. And actually, interestingly, I was just thinking about this. I think it was just 2 days ago. I've been kind of been on a Brahma Samhita trip, if that's the right word.
Wait, can I just clarify really quickly? The more the question is, what would Mahaprabhu be more happy with? Inner development, which is kind of like what we somewhat consider to be bhajan, or preaching. So like inner development, focusing ourselves, or preaching.
Okay, so that's the question. And Marie is saying, wouldn't solitary time with God be necessary to recharge, regroup, and refocus for preaching? Yes, I like that. That would be my answer in a nutshell. Shravan Kirtan, hearing and chanting, they go side by side. But I have to go back and finish my thread. So Govind, right, in the Brahma Samhita, right, Govindamadi Purusham Tamaham Bhajami, this Bhajami is the same word, right? And I noticed going through Sagar Maharaj's translation that he sometimes translates it as worship, sometimes translates it as adore, like there's some broadness of meaning. And Gurudev's translation of that was primarily service. That bhajan means service. And, like that's the root meaning of the word. Because see, like in really like these words, bhakti, bhajan, like there are different things surrounding that are implied. Like with the word bhakti, right? Like the direct definition is devotion. And welcome to Ananda Krishna Prabhu joining us from Sokel Seva Ashram. Like bhakti is directly translated as devotion, right? But there's a broader meaning surrounding that. What does devotion actually mean? And so you see Swami Maharaj, it's not just like an abstract, warm feeling of love, right? But so Swami Maharaj Prabhupada always consistently translates. You won't find anywhere he doesn't translate it as devotional service, right? To imply that spirit of dedication, that is a crucial element to bhakti, to devotion. So there, I mean, even I'm remembering now one line of Gurudev, Bhaj Datu Sevaya, something like that. The root of bhajan is service. And also I'm reminded of that quote, that famous quote of Bhakti Saranga Goswami Maharaj, where one of his godbrothers used that word bhajan in the same kind of way that you've mentioned. And this is like at the end of Goswami Maharaj's life in his last few years. And his whole life, he was like this powerful, active preacher. And at a certain time in his last years, one of his godbrothers said to him, "Oh, Goswami, now you are coming into your retirement years. Why don't you quietly do bhajan somewhere?" Bhajan meaning like sitting quietly and chanting japa and reading and all these things. And Goswami Maharaj was bothered by that. He didn't like that. And internally his response was, "This is my bhajan. Like, you think this isn't bhajan?" he was taking bhajan in the sense of seva. Now, for persons who are genuinely of the bhajananandi type, of the nature to quietly go on with their practice, like they actually have a real relationship with the Lord. Like they're not just doing air bhajan, right? Air japa, but they actually have a relationship with Shuddhanam, with the divine name. So it's actually meaningful for them to go and sit and, sit and quietly do, archan, all these things, Anyway, I'm kind of going into a lot of different areas now, but okay, now we'll actually go to what your question is, get away from semantics. And so inner development versus being on the field. That's what you're saying. See, it's a tricky thing, because if I think of Srila Sridhar Maharaj, then I feel he emphasized more inner cultivation, and I can think of a few examples where he quite seriously cautioned devotees, to not be too eager to go out and spread misconception, spread something which is not the pure thing. Like first become very solid within yourself and then go out, like, I don't think Akinchan Maharaj, our dear old friend, Bhakti Lalita Akinchan Maharaj, he had an experience like that when he was with ISKCON initially, and he was like quite an active preacher. He was preaching in South Africa, putting on like lots of plays and doing book distribution. And one year he went to Navadvip. When he came to the mission of Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he went to meet Srila Sridhar Maharaj for the first time, and he's starting to get involved with he's like getting excited about the idea of preaching in Srila Sridhar Maharaj's mission. Welcome to Dana. Hello, good morning in USA. And so as a part of that, one day he went out and bought a big bag of japa malas, chanting beads, because traditionally in ISKCON, and Srila Swami Maharaj Prabhupada instituted that for his purposes, chanting beads, japa malas would be handed out from the get-go. And so this was Akinchan Maharaj got very excited about this, purchasing all these malas, and he had a big bag that he was going to bring back to South Africa. And somebody in the mat happened to see that, and they saw him coming on a rickshaw through the front gate with all these malas, and they reported it to Srila Sridhar Maharaj. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj was very surprised, and he called for Akinchan Maharaj, Lalita Charan at the time, and kind of questioned him about what he's doing, and he explained, this isn't what Swami Maharaj Prabhupada did. Of course, we're not saying that is wrong, but it's not the standard way, and it is not really the real transaction. Really, the name has to come first from the Guru, from the Vaishnava, and then we will chant. And it's not really the way generally to chant on beads before receiving the name from a Guru, from a Vaishnava. So he explained these kinds of things, and one of the things he said was, like, if you're very eager to go out and preach, but you haven't first become solid within your own self, then he said, in the name of nectar, you will distribute poison. Very heavy. Akinchan Maharaj actually shared that recording with me, which, he's very shy about it. He doesn't give it to practically anyone, but I actually have a copy of that. I should go back and review it. But that's one of the things that he said, that. So many places Srila Sridhar Maharaj speaks on this. Many of you are no doubt familiar with that. He emphasized that. I was even mentioning the other day, there's another place where Srila Sridhar Maharaj, he goes so far as to say that for preachers, that you shouldn't always be fixed on preaching the ABCs. Like you also need to go deeper into the teachings. You need to go into discussing finer points. Because in the course of doing that, you can kind of forget about your own Krishna consciousness, right? You're so focused on giving it to others and like catering to them on a more basic level, you can forget about nourishing your own conception, your own faith, and you also need to progress. And there's also, that expression which is helpful somewhat here, becoming a victim of your own propaganda, right? That also can happen sometimes, where you may like adjust things in different ways to attract people, but then you kind of end up, getting sidetracked yourself, So we see that from on Srila Sridhar Maharaj's side. And also in his personal example, right? It's true that in his early years, he did go out. He was an active preacher, very active. But in his later years, he wanted to withdraw. He was even like hiding from his godbrothers. They were searching for him. They wanted to make him the head of a new mission after the departure of Srila Saraswati Thakur. But he, he was literally like hiding from them. He did not want that at all. He wanted to quietly go on with his own bhajan. I'll use that word here. His own life of service, worship to the higher plane. And I actually heard one recording of Srila Sridhar Maharaj, which was so beautiful, where he was describing when he first went to live in Navadvip, he was describing his daily routine. And he said that during the day, he would read Bhagavatam. He would cook something once a day and offer it at noontime. Some simple, he would bathe in the morning in the Ganges. During the day, he'd be focused on reading Bhagavatam. And then in the night, I remember no electricity, right? And he was paying, what was it? Maybe someone remembers, like 10 rupees a month, or was it 3 rupees a month rent, like. And then so there's no electricity. And then in the nighttime, when there's no light, in the evening, in the night, he would chant, So in the daytime, reading Bhagavatam, in the evening, nighttime, chanting on his Japamala. And what else? Maybe he'd mentioned growing some vegetables, with which he would cook once a day. And and he also mentioned some incident of like some snakes that were living in the rafters of this like little hut that he was living in. And one time when there was a flood and the water was starting to enter, the Ganga used to be very close to our mat. It's going the other way now, right, towards Mayapur. So it was very, very sweet. Like that's how he lived, like alone, and reading and chanting, and very, very some bathing in the Ganges. Like that's what he relishes. So. And then later, right, when the Westerners started coming, Srila Sridhar Maharaj was quite reluctant to accept them. He wanted to keep his mat small and pure. He emphasized that over, expansion and touching many, many souls. So that we feel more that example from Srila Sridhar Maharaj of going within, of refining your own connection, your own conception and all these things, your own practice. But if we think of our Gurudev, he showed a different mood, right? He was much more broad. Gurudev, Gurudev was willing to compromise quality for the sake of spreading Krishna consciousness to more persons, for giving more persons a chance. He wanted the maximum number of souls to get the mercy of Srila Sridhar Maharaj. That was his program. And he knew there were some things about Srila Sridhar Maharaj's mood and style that Westerners could no way be able to follow, like not at all, at the same time, Gurudev, he made these kinds of compromises, but at the same time, he had some sadness about that. We've heard of some of the comments that he made. It's not that Gurudev didn't want to follow that higher standard. He did want to. but he was considering, what was in the best interest of everyone and what they're ready for right now, like for example, there was one incident I heard of, Ganglila say no way is better or worse. Yeah, I mean, from one standpoint, yes, I would say that. And like generally speaking, if we're going to talk about the individual, what's appropriate for the individual, then that's something else. But as a general principle, I would say there are different moods in Krishna consciousness, right? And they both have their significance and value. You can't necessarily say which is superior, right? When it, again, right? If we talk about the two natures, Goshyanandi, the outgoing preacher, Bhajananandi, the internal, that more internal mood, at the highest level, they're both on the same platform, right? If it's real, if it's genuine, then they're both on the same platform. It's just a different mood. But then on coming to someone who's a struggling practitioner, at different times, then one instruction may be more or less important, right? But anyway, we can talk about that more later. But going back to the story I was telling, there was one occasion in the Mat when it was during the Gaur Purnima period, and sometimes our sweet devotees, as Madhusudan Maharaj would say, get overexcited. And welcome to Somya Sham Prabhu who's joined us, and also Anadi Krishna Prabhu joined us from Mexico. Also in the car. So, oh yeah, and so, everyone's getting very excited of this big international group of devotees, roaring kirtan. And at a certain point, devotees actually started like running in doing kirtan. This was during the evening parikrama. They're doing circumambulation around the temples. And at a certain point, everyone's getting so kind of intoxicated by the joy of the kirtan, very emotional. Everyone just started running, like doing kirtan, running around the temple. And I've heard descriptions of devotees who were in that kirtan and were very happy in that kirtan. And I've also heard descriptions from devotees who were sitting with Gurudev on his veranda, and what was his response? And what was his? He was sad to see that. And he said something like, even in Guru Maharaj's mat, even in Guru Maharaj's Shri Chaitanya Saraswati mat, this kind of sahajiya kirtan is happening. This imitation type of kirtan is happening. There was another time we heard this from Goswami Maharaj, that also during Gaur Purnima time, and a lot of devotees were coming back from the parikrama. There was a big group coming back, and there was some roaring kirtan going. This is from the Navadvip Dham parikrama, and it was quite an excited kirtan. And then Goswami Maharaj said to Gurudev, with some irony, he said, "Oh, those sahajiyas down the road sound like they're having a very good time." And Gurudev responded, "No, they are not." Oh, for those who aren't familiar, sahajiya we generally use to refer to like someone who's an imitationist. They emphasize a lot like the physical outer aspect of the practice, ignoring the internal side, the conscious side. And so Goswami Maharaj said, "Those sahajiyas down the road sound like they're having a very good time." And Gurudev said, "No, they are not sahajiyas." And Goswami Maharaj said, "No." And Gurudev said, "They are professionals." They are professionals. There were many things Gurudev could say behind closed doors. He may have been very tolerant and accommodating and accepting, but it was his hope that, devotees could gradually evolve and come to some finer understanding of what Krishna consciousness is. Welcome to Jayadev. Great to see you. No. there's also that time in Italy. Many you know this story, when it was the appearance of Lalita Devi, Lalita Saki, and Gurudev. This is interesting thing about Gurudev. Like he was never like in the story time mode, like, and because sometimes like the Leela of the Lord is described like that by our sweet devotees, like so many nice stories, right? And there's a story about Krishna, a story about Radha, a story about Satyabhama, and it's like kind of like story time, Gurudev was never in that mood. And he also was never in that mood of kind of like an academic, like so today is this and this day, and we're going to talk about this, and this is the lecture, and these are all the main points, I recently attended one. I don't normally, it just somehow happened. It like kind of came across my path. I listened to one lecture from one Vaishnava in another mission, and it was the appearance day of Ramachandra. And he's a nice devotee, and he's actually a professor, a religious studies professor. That's his world, right? But he starts out his talk, so he's a good speaker and everything. But he starts out his talk saying, we're going to discuss what the problems of Ram Leela are. Like kind of like speaking like from a kind of like a literature or sociological perspective. Like, what are the problems with Ram Leela, and how do we address these? And then straight up, I'm like got my back up, like, hey. This isn't how a devotee talks. We're not academics. You got to leave that. When you leave the classroom, like leave it there, leave it in the classroom. When you enter the temple, change your clothes here, change your mindset here. Like in like studies of morality, they talk about like the problems of so and so, such and such, right? This idea and that idea. It's like you don't. That's not how you look. That's not the lens through which you look at the Lord's Leela. No. So our Gurudev, he never had that kind of view. And it was always like kind of natural. And if it came, it came. And if it didn't come, it didn't come. There was this one time I always remember, and this talk is actually published on our Mott's website. It was the appearance day of Bhakti Vinod Thakur, which is coming up in September. And that morning, our Gurudev was not showing good health. And so he didn't, normally early in the morning, we'd all come in like 5 a.m. or earlier after the arati. But that morning he wasn't well. And so we didn't go in. And then I happened to be passing by his room later, maybe around 9 a.m. and he was sitting up. And so I thought, I'll go in and give my obeisance. And so I went in and he just like, and there were only like 2 people in the room. It was like 2. It was like Shuddha Shava Prabhu and Nitya Gopal was there. And maybe someone else could have been there, maybe 1 or 2 others. Maybe Devi Shakti was actually there, come to think of it. And I just happened to go in and he just spontaneously started speaking very beautifully about Bhakti Vinod Thakur. Just very spontaneously, very naturally, only like 2 or 3 people in the room. It was never like he had a paper, he had a thesis on Bhakti Vinod Thakur. It was never like that. But he was speaking from the heart, as if Bhakti Vinod Thakur was someone who he knew, and no doubt he does. And he even mentioned in that talk, he said, there are others who, and he would say that sometimes too, there are others, they can tell you all the historical details and the chronology of things. And said, but I'm just here to give you like the essence, the essence of who Bhakti Vinod Thakur was. That was always his mood. What was the essential? He was focusing on that. So, I went on a really big tangent there. The story I was gonna tell is this incident in Italy when it's Lalita Saki's appearance day, appearance of Lalita Devi, one of the principal gopis of Vrindavan. And And Gurudev's just sitting quietly in his room, you know. He's not like, oh, everybody, it's Lalita Devi's appearance day, you know, let's have a lecture on that. He's sitting quietly, and no doubt in his own consciousness, he's you know, percolating all these higher things, right? But anyway, then somebody in the room asked our Gurudev, oh, today's Lalita Devi's appearance day, you know, would you say something about her? And then our Gurudev, as he would say sometimes, said, Jai Ma Kali. Jai Ma Kali. Ma Kali, for those who aren't familiar, she's kind of like she's the consort of Lord Shiva, and she's like the kind of like the prison warden of the material world. She's the mistress of the material energy. So she's very connected to this worldly plane. And her worship is very popular, particularly in Bengal. She's known to bestow material benefit. She's usually worshipped in that way, you know, that she will grant so many things of this world, you know. So like someone's asking Gurudev this very like on this very high topic, Lalita, one of the intimate associates of Krishna in the most intimate relationship, and our Gurudev's going Jai Ma Kali, you know, and then he went on to explain, you know, like, you know, why am I saying this? Because we're not qualified to talk about that, you know, we're not qualified to discuss the glories of Lalita Devi. These are very high things, you know? And then he did go on to speak something of her glories, but he gave this caution, you know, we won't look at these things like they're a storybook, you know. And welcome to Narayani, and Chintamani's also joined us, and also Ajita Krishna Prabhu's here. Dandavat to all of you, wonderful souls. So going back to our original point, you know, our Gurudev, he was more generous and accommodating, but he you know, if we look with a more refined eye, we'll see that Gurudev, there was also another how can we say, Gurudev wasn't only just promoting this like very generous, accommodating. It wasn't the only aspect. Okay, let's say, let's use the word aspect. It wasn't the only aspect of his presentation to the devotees. There was another aspect where he was really encouraging a more refined appreciation for Krishna consciousness. He could be quite heavy sometimes, you know. You know, like I remember one time he's saying like, nobody's reading the books, you know, we're printing all these books to be read, and things like that. And I remember once he was speaking quite sharply, kind of saying like when we're reading, are we reading attentively, or are we eating some prasadam in one hand and you know, reading with the other? We're eating, and you know, like this very casual type of thing. And you know, he didn't like that. This is one of the things about being in the presence of such a great soul. Even the smallest, tiniest things take on the greatest significance. And there was one like seconds with Gurudev that I always remember. It was such a tiny thing. It was just one day sitting at his desk, and he had some small pile of scriptures, you know, like he would have Bhagavad Gita, Chaitanya Charitamrita, like that, and others, Bhakti Rasamrita, and he had some pile of books on his desk, and they were like slightly crooked, and he like very consciously and in a very focused way, he straightened them out. Like it was something very sacred, you know. It's not like if I think of my room and I've got like, you know, a half-eaten bowl of prasadam and a few holy books and an orange and some wires. It's just disgraceful, you know. Like it's like they were really, he considered them to be like deities, you know, really, like we shouldn't even put a cup of water on the same, or even like our phones, you know, like on the same place where we're putting one of these books, because, you know, that water you're drinking with your lips, you know, like, and these aren't just rules, but it's actually an expression of love, you know. These are sacred, worshipable things, you know. And and I saw our Gurudev, he like, that was something he really felt. He was so conscious and so careful in the way that he would treat these things, this divine paraphernalia. So there was also that side of Gurudev where he really wanted a more refined practice and understanding of Krishna consciousness. Okay, Gurudev has included a kindergarten. Let's say Srila Sridhar Maharaj didn't have a kindergarten section in his school, but Gurudev included that mercifully. But he didn't want us to remain in kindergarten. Oh, Chintamani, thanks for your note. He didn't want, Gurudev was accommodating the kindergarten section, but he didn't want devotees to remain there. He didn't want devotees to remain there. He wanted them, he was giving them a chance to enter the school, and he wanted them to move up within that school. So, and Gurudev also would speak about, this idea of Shravan and Kirtan, in the sense of like developing our own understanding, as we are distributing. There was another thing on the tip of my tongue just now. Oh yeah, another thing, comment of Gurudev's, which I've been thinking about lately, because actually this is something I'm working out too, like in my presentation of Krishna consciousness and my sharing of Krishna consciousness, like who is the audience actually? Like, am I going to be focused more on newcomers? Am I talking to newcomers and their language? Or am I talking to the devotees, to the practitioners? That's something I've been working out. And it can get a little confusing sometimes. Like I need to have 2 YouTube channels and 5 Facebook pages and so on, and 2 different websites and so on and so forth. It can get a little exhausting and confusing and bewildering sometimes. And it's like, I'm at a point where it's like, I just want to pick one because it just simplify everything. And what came to my mind the other day, actually, it's something that one instruction Gurudev gave once to someone. He said to preach according to your realization. Like, preach according to your realization. No. So, and when I first heard that comment of Gurudev's a few years ago, and at the time, like my understanding of it was he was like warning someone not to preach beyond, right? Don't try and preach something that's beyond your level, that's beyond your realization. Like stay within a safe zone. But now I'm contemplating, maybe there's also an implication that, you don't want to preach too far below your understanding also. Of course, to some extent, right? We have to be accommodating, but do we need to be overly fixated on that? Like if you have some more wealth that's been given to you, are you just going to sit on that? Are you going to cultivate that and share that? That feels like more of a natural flow. And if everybody is preaching at their level of realization, then that, to me, it seems very harmonizing, dynamic, and everyone's being accommodated there, and everyone's also progressing there. So, but ultimately, what I would say to this question is, I would say it depends. I mean, Gurudev, I also heard, now I'm thinking about it, I've also heard Gurudev a few times say that not everybody needs to be a preacher. I've also heard Gurudev say that several times, actually, and I'm sure you have too. Several times I've heard him. Now I'm thinking about it, I've heard him make that point, that not everybody needs to be a preacher. And he also cautioned against this kind of ego that sometimes persons could have, that I will preach, I will be a big preacher. He cautioned about that. And he spoke about, many of you, are familiar with this. He mentioned how for the general practitioners, you don't need to read so much, that, Gurudev emphasized the, service connection and cultivating what we have in the main texts, like Sharanagati, Prapanajivanamrita, Bhagavad Gita, our Guru's books, but going into all the Gaudiya literature, he said that is more for the preacher, that they have that service. That it doesn't necessarily mean they're superior to anyone, but it's just that's like their role. That's what their service is. And so in order to encourage the faith of others more, present in a more developed way, then it is good that they will read more and try to understand more. So that's also coming to mind. So I would say in conclusion that, but of course, at the same time, there is preaching in a kind of a general sense of like speaking to your friends and your family. That's appropriate for everyone, right? You're eating something nice and you want to share it with others. That's a natural, organic type of thing that will happen. But in terms of like preaching in an organized way, like a systematic, organized way, that's not for everyone, and we should try to understand if that's our role, are we directly, of course, the mission as a whole is existing for that purpose of spreading the message of Mahaprabhu, but there will be those who are more directly doing that and those who are more indirectly, supporting that overall mission. And of course, it goes without saying that no matter what your role is, you must be nourishing your own Krishna consciousness. That is indispensable for everyone. Someone may have a gift as a preacher, but if they lose their own Krishna consciousness, then what is the use? What is the use of what they're presenting? So for across the board, everybody needs to nourish their own Krishna consciousness. And then for some, it will be appropriate to also focus on preaching as a service. Those are my thoughts. Chinmoy Prabhu, what do you think? What are your thoughts?
Well, there's no, I would say, correct answer to this, because like the Vaishnava can take the gem and turn it in. There's many different aspects. So through the Vaishnava, we're getting these different aspects of the tattva, the revealed truth.
Yes. It is true. We can think of different examples, like Gaur-Kishore Das Babaji, who's the guru of Saraswati Thakur, right? When Saraswati Thakur made that decision, he's going to go to preach in Calcutta, then, Gaur-Kishore told him, don't do that. Calcutta is the place of Kali, stay in the safety of the Dham. That was the mood of Gaur-Kishore. He was a Bhajananandi, classic Bhajananandi. He's quietly, individually continuing with his divine service. And then Saraswati Thakur, what's his mood? It's all about the distribution. It's all about spreading Mahaprabhu's message. And there's that incident I'm reminded of with Krishnadas Babaji, because Krishnadas Babaji he only liked Nam Bhajan. He only liked Nam Seva, chanting of the name. He was never, in his whole life, he always shied away from the practical missionary aspects of mission and preaching, like in an outward way. So there was that one incident, well-known incident, when he was staying quietly in some jungle somewhere, chanting on his japa. And when Saraswati and Srila Sridhar Maharaj happened to be in a temple nearby, he was like the manager there or something, and he sent a message to Saraswati Thakur saying, "Oh, this, what was his name at the time? He had a Swadhikananda Brahmachari." He said, "Oh, Swadhikananda Brahmachari is nearby in this jungle, Balihati, it's called. Should I try to engage him, involve him in the mission?" And Saraswati Thakur wrote back with a very strong response. And he said, "I do not recognize sitting in the jungle counting beads. He said, he referred to his chanting of the name as counting beads. As I cannot recognize that as Krishnanushilanam, the cultivation of Krishna consciousness. And he said, if you can engage him in the practical affairs of the mission, you will be his best friend. And what's interesting is that Krishnadas Babaji Maharaj, he was actually he was a pure, Gurudev described him as a pure devotee. It's not like he's just sitting on some mental trip chanting. He's actually contacting the holy name. But still that wasn't satisfactory to Saraswati Thakur. So yes, we see it is correct. There isn't one absolute answer. But I would say the most important thing is that we are engaged in authentic Krishna consciousness. Whether we're preaching or not, that's a secondary consideration. But that we are authentically practicing Krishna consciousness, that is of utmost importance. And how our service may play out, that will be different in different cases, right? But we must be true to the thread, the thread that is being unraveled before us. What is wanted, what is desired of us. We must be true to that. But very, very nice topics, Chinmoy Prabhu. And I should say something. I feel a bit bewildered because there was this confusion over whether it was Rupa Goswami. So I feel bad, like I should have woken up this morning in the consciousness that is Rupa Goswami's divine disappearance day. Now it's like the end of it's the morning there in America, at least. But so I'll imagine I'm in America. But here it's the end of the day. So I feel like I wasted my day not thinking about Rupa Goswami. So who is Rupa Goswami? Not everyone here knows, perhaps. He is the head of our lineage. We are the Rupa Nuga Sampradaya. The group of Rupa Nuga means followers of Rupa, and very beloved, sometimes described as the most beloved disciple of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, whom Mahaprabhu appointed to be his successor. He was the chosen successor of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And one of the most significant points about Rupa Goswami is that he was empowered to put Mahaprabhu's teachings into writing. And so he's given many significant texts which are establishing Mahaprabhu's teachings of devotion in a dignified manner, in citing scriptural evidence, so demonstrating the authenticity, and also in a straightforward way outlining what Mahaprabhu's teachings are and his particular angle in the plane of devotion. So Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Upadeshamrita, the nectar of instruction. These are some of the more well-known and emphasized texts. Then he's also written some texts which we don't read, therefore we were mentioning we're in kindergarten. So some of those texts are for the PhD students. They're dealing with the more intimate Leela Ujjwala, Nilamani. They're dealing with the more intimate Leela, divine Leela of Shri Radha Krishna, Brajabasis, Brajagopis. And he is one of the 6 Goswamis, great Vaishnava saint scholars who lived in Vrindavan, and they all mostly had particular contributions in the literature side of things. And his brother, of course, elder brother Sanatan, also part of this group. Jiva was his nephew, also part of this group, and others. And he was personally instructed by Mahaprabhu for 10 days, which is quite significant because that was, there were very few persons who had that kind of personal instruction from the Lord. And, there's one famous verse, which is, most often quoted in connection with Rupa Goswami, Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swa Padanti comes, aspiring for the foot dust, grace or Rupa, who was the most beloved of Lord Chaitanya and who understood the inner heart, Manobishtam, who understood the inner heart of Mahaprabhu. He received this special grace from Mahaprabhu, that he was privy to the Lord's heart. And we don't have so much time left, but the primary example of that comes to mind is described in Chaitanya Charitamrita, when we were discussing this recently, because the Rath Yatra, actually the Rath Yatra is still going on around the world. Devotees in Los Angeles just had a Chaitanya Doya was just there, and Ganga Leela was just there. But actually, the actual day was the 1st of July. And there was this one incident when Mahaprabhu, maybe I won't go into all of the fine ontology behind, but Mahaprabhu was chanting a particular verse during the Rath Yatra, which was describing, it was actually an excerpt from a very ordinary, mundane novel, describing a woman lamenting about her previous lover. And it was quite puzzling for the devotees around Mahaprabhu. Why he's singing this very ordinary thing about some ordinary woman's love affair. It was a little puzzling. Nobody could understand, except for Srup Damodar. Srup Damodar is number one next to Mahaprabhu. But Rupa Goswami also had the blessing to understand, because actually the connection is the mood is connecting with the mood of Radharani, meeting Krishna after so many years of separation in Kurukshetra. And that feeling of separation, which actually increased rather than getting relief, it reached its acme, because this is not Krishna of Vrindavan, this is Krishna of Dwarka. It's a different mood, which was painful for the Braja Gopis. So this was the mood that Mahaprabhu was invoking, and only Rupa could understand that. And then later, Rupa actually wrote a parallel verse describing the meeting between Radha and Krishna and the heart of Radharani, and drawing out this meaning of Mahaprabhu when he was chanting that verse. And so it's a very beautiful description in Chaitanya Charitamrita, how Rupa Goswami, one day he wrote this on a palm leaf, and then he tucked it into the roof of his cottage. And then he went out to bathe for his morning bath in the ocean. And meanwhile, Mahaprabhu is coming to do his morning rounds. Every day Mahaprabhu would go generally to visit Rup and Haridas, Sanatan. They would stay in this one place, Siddhabakul. And Mahaprabhu would go for his morning bath, and he had his rounds that he would make. So Rupa wrote this shloka, tucks it in his roof, goes out to bathe. Meanwhile, Mahaprabhu is returning from his bath, or he's on his way to his bath, and he stops at Rupa's place, and Rupa's not there, but he sees that shloka tucked in the roof. And so Mahaprabhu took it and he read, he's astonished. Priyaso ham sahachari kurukshetra militas begins like this. And it's describing the sentiment of Srimati Radharani, which, we're not qualified to go into, but I gave some idea, you all know. And so Mahaprabhu read this verse and he's astonished. How does Rupa know my heart? And then Rupa Goswami returns in the meantime, and Mahaprabhu takes him onto his lap. It's a very sweet moment. And then Mahaprabhu slaps him. It's like a love slap. And he says, like, like, hey, like, how did you know? Like, this was my private thing. Like, how did you know this? You know, how did you know this? And Rupa's very shy and quiet, and then Mahaprabhu looks at Srup Damodar. How does Rupa know? How is it possible that he could know my inner heart? And then Srup Damodar, he says, well, it's only possible because you must have let him. You must have given him your grace to enable him to know. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible. You know? And then later, Mahaprabhu organizes this meeting. And it's not like, you know, Mahaprabhu makes this big announcement or certificate, Rupa will be my successor, you know, but wasn't like there was a lawyer present, you know, and they made a contract. but Mahaprabhu organized this meeting with all of the Vaishnavas in Puri at that time, and it was like kind of like a public examination of Rupa Goswami, which was led by the head examiner was Ramananda Rai, and so the idea was to demonstrate how qualified Rupa Goswami was, and that he had the specific blessings of Mahaprabhu and was inviting the blessings of all the other significant Vaishnavas. And so there was like an examination, in particular, going through some of Rupa Goswami's drama. He also composed some dramas, Vidagdha Madhava, Lalita Madhava, in particular, describing Krishna Leela. And so there was some kind of like, from the perspective of Sanskrit poetry, there was some examination, some questioning on the side of Ramananda Rai. And so it was, and Mahaprabhu also requested the Vaishnavas, like, it's not enough that I'm giving my mercy, but he also needs the mercy of all of you, you know, which is another significant point. And some very beautiful verses that they discuss in that meeting. Narpita chirim chirat karunaya vatirna kalo samarpayitam unutodvala rasam sabhakti shyam hari purata sundara duty kadamba sandipita sada hridaya kandare spurutu vashachi nandana. This is one of the first verses of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Welcome to Narayani. I don't remember if I said hello before, but dear Narayani. So this is in the very first few verses of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Kaviraj Goswami cites this verse as part of his invocation. And it's like a benediction. You know, may that beautiful golden Lord, the son of Shachi Devi, be eternally resplendent in the core of your heart. You know, who has come to give what has never been given before, this Ujvala Rasam, this most shining, glorious rasa, Madhura rasa, conjugal love, you know, Krishna prema. Coming to give his own devotion, his devotion to himself. You know, may he be Sada Hridaya, in the innermost core of your heart, may he be eternally resplendent there. Very beautiful, beautiful verse. You know. And another one, I mean, this is one of the things that Rupa Goswami is renowned for, his beautiful, fine Sanskrit poetry. Very beautiful. And another one, and this one, Haridas Thakur, and Haridas Thakur is known as the Namacharya. He's the first giver of the holy name. So Haridas is in ecstasy over this verse. And Haridas says, I've never heard any verse that just so wonderfully describes the glories of the name. This Tunde Tanda Vinida Timvita Nute Tunda. Devi Shakti knows this verse by heart. Tunde Tanda Vinida Timvita Nute Tundavali Labdaye Karna Kroda Kadambini Gatayate Karnar Bude Vyaspriham Cheta Prangana Sangini Vijayate Sarvendriyanam Kritim No Jane Janita Kiyadbir Krishneti Varnadvaya. I cannot say how much ecstasy, how much amrita, how much nectar is within just these two syllables of Krishna. You know, when that name enters my ears, I think 2 ears are not enough. I need millions of ears to appreciate the sweetness of this sweet, sweet name. And when that name dances upon my tongue, I feel one tongue is not enough to taste the sweetness of this name. I need millions of tongues. Only millions of tongues will be sufficient. And finally, that name, 1,000 tongues to sing. And finally, when that name, reaches my inner consciousness, it paralyzes my whole system. All my senses become paralyzed. We're reminded by this verse of one expression of the Braja Gopis where they're cursing the creator for creating not only just two eyes, but like not only are there only two eyes, for one who would see the beauty of Krishna, for one who would see the beauty of Krishna, they've only been given two eyes, only two. And not only that, even more foolish, these eyes blink. I'm trying to remember, there's a place in Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's in Bhagavatam and also in Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's discussed. So beautiful, so beautiful. They're literally cursing Lord Brahma, like, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know how to do your job properly because you don't know what it's like to see the beauty of Krishna. But for one who would see the beauty of Krishna, you've only given them two eyes that blink. We need millions of eyes. So, Rupa Goswami. Well, I probably should stop there before I get myself in trouble. We are entering into high topics. And that's something that we're very grateful to our gurus for. Our Gurudev Srila Govinda Maharaj, especially, I would say, he really kind of demonstrated the mood with which we will approach these topics. Because it's not, Krishna consciousness is not just a transaction of information, right? But there's so many fine points of sentiment, mood, and realistic assessment of our current position, right? And that's needed in order to make real progress. And our Gurudev, he really gave us that. He put us in a good place for that. So we are always careful in entering into the subject matter. Does anyone else want to share any thoughts before we close for today? So today, and also Gauridas Pandit, who was an associate of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he's actually, as I recall, described as Subal Saka in Krishna Leela. And maybe we'll just remember one beautiful pastime of his, which is very well known. So Subal Saka, right? He's in Sakya Ras, primarily, although he's special in that there's also some touch of higher rasas, we're told. But there's this incident when Mahaprabhu and Nityananda, they came to visit him, and they stayed for some time, and then they were getting ready to leave. And but Gauridas Pandit couldn't. This is in Kalna, actually, which is close to Navadvip. Not like maybe 40 minutes on the train from where our main temple was. And so Mahaprabhu and Nityananda Prabhu, they're getting ready to leave, and Gauridas Pandit can't tolerate the separation. And so he said, please, he tells them, don't go. And they told him, well, why don't you have some deities made, of ourselves, and you can feel connected to us through those deities. And so he had these deities made, and then, okay, Marie, so good to see you always. Thanks for joining and sharing your insights. So then Mahaprabhu and Nityananda, they're about to go, and then Gauridas Pandit says, hang on a minute, you two should stay here and they can go. Oh, Divi Shakti saying it's also Ramai's disappearance day today. That's right. Wow. I was actually here with Janardha Maharaj on this day. Now you've reminded me. Janardha Maharaj was here in London when we heard the news. Ramai was a very beloved and worshipable devotee in our mission, for those who don't know him. He was the priest, the pujari at our temple in SoCal, California for many, many years. And he was the most devout pujari that I think anybody in our mission had ever known. He had a standard, he had his own standard, which went beyond anything. You know, he would change the deities twice a day. He practically didn't sleep. You know, he would be up from 3, go to bed maybe 11. No, I mean non-stop serving the deities. And incredible, superhuman Vaishnava. He passed away just maybe 3-4 years ago now. And he passed away on this day is also very significant. So Jai, thanks for reminding us to be Shakti Didi. Shripad Ramai Archani Ketan Prabhu. Probably in SoCal, they're having some remembrance. So Gauri Das Pandit, so going back to this history we're telling, he told Mahaprabhu Nityananda, no, actually you two stay here and the deities can go. So Mahaprabhu Nityananda said, okay, fine. So they assumed the form of the deities and the deities got up to go. And then Gauri Das Pandit said, wait, I've changed my mind. You know, actually you stay and they can go. You know, and it went on like this a few times until he finally accepted, you know, and they could leave. You know. So devotee of a very high caliber, you know, intimate associate of Mahaprabhu and Nityananda Prabhu. Jai Srila Rupa Goswami ki jai, Shri Gauri Das Pandit ki jai, Tadiya Tito Bhav Mahamahotsavatiti ki jai, Srila Bhakti Sundar Govinda Deva Goswami Maharaj ki jai, Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Deva Goswami Maharaj ki jai, Shri Rupanuga Guru Varga ki jai, Acharya Vrinda ki jai, Seva Vrinda ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Samagata Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Nitai Gaur Premanande. Thank you all for your good company.
Jai Vishakha Didi ki jai.
Hope you all have a spiritually nourishing, uplifting week ahead, and look forward to next time. Jai Gurudev.